Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this October lecture. We've had one already about Viking genes, and the one in November will be about maps of Stornoway. So, quite interesting, and hopefully you'll enjoy tonight's lecture. Now, Ken is my colleague in the Stornoway Historical Society, but I must admit that I was Ken's first golf partner. But after I was taking 5 shots to get to Ken's first, I gave up and never returned. But we should perhaps have a starter and started off bang on 7, but we haven't. But I'm not going to hold you back because Ken gives an annual lecture, so he's well known to all those from the Historical Society and well known to all you golfers. So there will be a question and answer session later on, and I will introduce you to how to use the microphone, because there's only 1 or 2 can use it at a time. Okay, over to you, Ken.
Okay, thank you very much. Is the microphone on, right? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This classic view of Stornoway Golf Course was photographed by Dave Gilmore and was featured in the magazine Golf Monthly. Tonight, I will cover the early years from 1890. Then I will take a detailed look at the move from Melbus to Lady Lever Park. I'll look at the story of demolition and construction, the clubhouse in the castle grounds being opened in 1953 and then replaced by the present one in 1997. And to close, I'll refer to some people and events. It's impossible to cover everything and everyone tonight, so this will be my selection based on to a certain extent on the availability of suitable images. The description of Stornoway Golf Club in the Golfing Annual of 1890-91, sandwiched alphabetically between Stonehaven and Stow-on-the-Wold, states that the course consists of 9 holes situated on the Melbus links within 3 miles of the borough of Stornoway and running parallel to the shores of Broad Bay. There is no known reference to Stornoway in any earlier golfing annual or handbook. So, who designed and laid out the course? I wish first of all to refer to the centenary year writings of Norrie MacGregor, who was Honorary Secretary 1965 to 1974 and Captain 1983 to 84, in which he described 2 splendid oak and brass framed photographs of old Tom Morris and Horace Hutchison. Norrie could only speculate on the reason for their presence in Stornoway. Morris definitely laid out the delightful course at Askernish in South Uist in 1891, and we certainly like the idea of these 2 gentlemen, respectively the most eminent professional and amateur golfers of their time, making a journey to the Western Isles to lay out golf courses. It was as good a theory as any for the origin of Stornoway Golf Club, but it was difficult to disprove because the surviving minute books of the club only go as far back as 1933. And remember, Norrie wrote all this in 1990, the club's centenary year. So after my retirement in 2008, I took on a keen interest in local history. And I wanted to test whether Norrie MacGregor's speculation could be confirmed or refuted by fact. So where is this? Not convinced by the speculation about old Tom Morris, my research took me to the village hall in Everton in Easter Ross. Notice the big oil painting on the wall. It's part of the Highland Council's collection. Let's move in for a close-up. Who is he? And see the engraved plaque on the wall under the painting. Let's move in for another close-up. The painting is of Major Randall Jackson of Sawdill, donor of the Jackson Medal to our club. This is Sawdill in Easter Ross, and nothing to do with Sawdill Point on the Isle of Lewis. Jackson's personal history can be found in the Everton tapestries a book in the Highland Council's library in Dingwall. Here is one side of the Jackson medal, showing the Jackson clan crest, and here is the other side of the Jackson medal, showing the name of the donor, Major Randall Jackson, and the date, July 17th, 1890, thought to be the precise date of the club's institution. And then local and regional newspapers were my next targets for research. And then I hit the jackpot with this extract from the Inverness Courier, dated Friday 25th July 1890. As the text is a wee bit blurred, I'm going to recite part of it because it's important. Stornoway. A new golf course was opened at Stornoway last week by Major Jackson of Sordell. Mr. McHardy, captain of Inverness Golf Club, and members of the Stornoway Golfing Club. Note it's not the Stornoway Golf Club, it's the Stornoway Golfing Club, so it's informal. The course lies on the Melbust Links within 3 miles of the borough and runs parallel with the west shore of Broad Bay, from within a few hundred yards of the farmhouse at Melbust. Stretching outwards for over 1.5 miles, it terminates at a point overlooking the seashore. And then, at the foot of the same article, it reads, Major Jackson intimated his intention to present a medal for competition by members of the club. So, I already knew that Major Jackson was a generous benefactor of golf clubs in the north of Scotland, but I could not account for the presence in Stornoway of Mr. McHardy, the captain of Inverness Golf Club. Why was he here? This is a 492-page book about the writings of John Sutherland. John Sutherland was secretary of Dornoch Golf Club from 1883 to 1909, and in addition, he wrote a weekly column in the London Daily News from 1906 to 1912. In 1908, a newspaper cutting from Sutherland's press column refers to Melbust, stating again, originally the course was laid out by Mr. Alexander McHardy. The course was laid out by Mr. Alexander McHardy, Chief Constable of Inverness-shire, a gentleman to whom golfers in the north of Scotland owe much for his untiring efforts over a period of at least 20 years in the cause of the game in many parts of the Highlands. Situated in Clonmacnoise Cemetery in Inverness and overlooking the Caledonian Canal lies the grave of Britain's longest serving Chief Constable, Alexander McHardy, known as Alistair, member of the Royal Victorian Order and King's Police Medal. He was born in 1839. He served a total of 53 years as a police officer, 45 of these as Chief Constable between Sutherland and Inverness-shire, and the precise number of golf courses credited to McHardy's dedicated design skills may never be known. And here is a list of McHardy courses in the north of Scotland, as detailed on the website entitled Forgotten Greens. 39 courses listed, including Stornoway. As Harry Ward, the golf historian from Lanark and custodian of that website, said, we may never know how many other courses were linked to the skills of Alexander McHardy. Returning to the Golf Causerie by John Sutherland, we find this interesting newspaper cutting from the London Daily News, dated 15th of August 1908. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it is quite clear on the screen, but it does say that we reported that Joseph Dalgleish, the Nairn professional, was recently employed in the extension of the 9-hole course at Stornoway to the full complement of 18, and he has much to say in praise of the links out there. So, my conclusions on the basis of all that research. I believe we can refute all speculation relating to old Tom Morris, and that we can say without doubt that Stornoway Golf Club was indeed instituted in July 1890, that the 9-hole course was designed and laid out by Alexander McHardy, and that the course was subsequently extended to 18 holes by Joseph Dalgleish in 1908. This, in fact, was confirmed by contact between me and the Nairn Golf Club historian. In 1891, the club gained an influential ally in the person of Lady Mary Jane Matheson of Lewis Castle, widow of Sir James, owner of the island and resident at Lewis Castle. Sir James had died in 1878, leaving his widow as proprietrix of the island. Lady Matheson petitioned successfully to the Crofters Commission as proprietrix of the lands of Melbus and Stanish to enable crofters to grave their livestock on land which would also be used, and I quote, for the purpose of the free exercise of the game of golf. And the request was granted. The crofters had to allow the golfers to play golf on the land, and in turn the golf club were instructed to pay the crofters £7 per year in compensation for any injury or disturbance to livestock. And here is the Melbus scorecard. It's very, very faint at the bottom, but the writing down at the bottom reads, stymie measure. The diagonal length of the card is 6 inches. In singles match play, when one player's ball blocked the path of another player's ball on the green, but they were not within 6 inches of each other, the obstructing player's ball could not be lifted. The player was stymied. Instead, the player who was further away from the hole had to attempt to slice, hook or chip his ball past the obstacle ball, and sometimes the player would even attempt to chip his ball over the opponent's ball into the hole. The stymie rule is an interesting piece of golf history, and you can Google the details. On the other side of the Melbus scorecard, we have the plan of the course, and on the left side you can see the location of the clubhouse, and I will refer again to the clubhouse in a few moments. I'll just give you a few moments just to get the gist of the course. This is a photo of play from a greenside bunker at the 9th. You may have noticed on the scorecard that this 9th hole at Melbus had the same name as our own present 9th, the short, at Lady Lever Park. An interesting historical coincidence. Here is a photo of 5 local golfers. From the left, John McLean, Peter MacDonald, known as Peter Squeak. He had a shop on Cromwell Street beside the present Bank of Scotland. And next is Dan McGregor and Morecambe Macaulay, known as Callum Cawley, with Neil Macmillan kneeling. The story of Peter MacDonald's nickname is interesting. It's got nothing to do with squeaky shoes or squeaky doors. When Peter was young, he couldn't say the word picturesque. He said picture squeak. And that was how he got his nickname. In 1913, over 2 days in June, a bazaar was held in the Stornoway Town Hall to raise money for the construction of a clubhouse at Melbus. And that bazaar raised £502 and 9 shillings, enabling the club to erect a clubhouse at the Stanish end of the course, free from debt. This is the clubhouse, an impressive building, officially opened on Wednesday, 27th of August 1913, by Mr. I.J. Macpherson, Member of Parliament for the County of Ross. And here are the green fees at Melbus at that time. Now, those of you who are not up with the pounds, shillings and pence, I'll just explain that in our present-day currency, they equate to 5 pence per day, 12.5 pence per week, and 37.5 pence per month. This postcard shows golfers in action at Melbus in the early 1930s, with our impressive clubhouse visible in the left background. We know the approximate date because of the serial number and the letters JV at the bottom right corner, signifying the photo was registered with J. Valentine postcards in 1932. From the same era, in the 1930s, the Society holds a Rules of Golf Handbook dated 1933, with an insert listing the rule changes since the previous edition in 1920. Now, this is going to be an interesting description, this one. The earliest surviving minute book of Stornoway Golf Club covers the year 1933. But thanks to our past captain, Stuart MacDonald, a secretary's report for 1928 has turned up. This report includes financial information as well, because the secretary in these days provided a summary of the treasurer's report. This old document is in very poor condition, but here is a flavour of the contents. Cost and installation of new lockers, £36. Now that's not one locker, that's a lot. Club funds now available, £186.17 shillings and a penny. Gross profit for 1928, £28.9 and 4 pence. 119 gentlemen members, 64 lady members, 8 junior members. There was a surplus from a recent whist drive and dance, amounted to £6, 9 shillings and 3 pence. And in that year, the Stornoway Golf Club had entrance in the county championship in Tain. The tea room has been well run and well used throughout the year. Expenditure on provisions and aerated waters, £15, 7 shillings and 7 pence. Sales income, £36, 17 and 7 pence, leaving a gross profit of £21, 10 shillings. But 15% had to go to Mrs. McIntosh, leaving a net profit of £18, 5 and 6 pence. The clubhouse will be painted at an early date, and I have to remind all members that their annual subscription is now due and should be paid to the treasurer at an early date. Signed, S. McGill, Honorary Secretary. And now I move to illustrate one of the most interesting sections of the club's early history. Melbust to Lady Lever Park. This is Captain Ernest Edmund Fresson, OBE, known as Ted, who lived from 20th September 1891 to 25th September 1963. He was a pioneer aviator, primarily remembered for establishing Highland Airways, which inaugurated a passenger service between Inverness, Wick and Kirkwall on the 8th of May 1933. Then in July 1933, the decision of an extraordinary general meeting at Stornoway Golf Club, Melbust, was to refuse permission to Midland and Scottish air ferries to use the second fairway as an aircraft runway. Now, ultimately, as you all know, we were to lose our course and clubhouse during World War II. The seeds of these losses were sown fully 5 years before the outbreak of war, when Ted Fresson landed on the grass of Melbust Links on the 8th of March 1934, piloting a de Havilland Dragon, which later became part of the BEA flight in 1947. A year later, he was back in Stornoway, having landed on the beach at Melbust. And he was there to try to convince the Stornoway Town Council to provide an airstrip on the golf links. At that time, the council could not agree to commit a capital expenditure to Fresson's idea, because they'd already discussed the interesting prospect of the town's air services being provided by flying boats operating in the harbour from Curry Point. Fresson is commemorated by several memorials in the Highlands and Islands. A highly skilled aviator, it was well known in these days that there was a suitable field available, he could land an aircraft on it. He set up airmail services and air ambulance services from Inverness to numerous islands, and many of you will have seen his bronze statue outside the terminal building at Inverness Airport. That's the one on the left, and the one on the right is at Kirkwall Airport, Orkney. Later on, he became an advisor to the Minister of Defence and the Admiralty, and one of his later successful recommendations was the establishment of a tarmac runway at Stornoway, and it was acknowledged as being the first of its kind in Britain. And so, the battle for Melbust's survival began. And here follows a summary of extracts from the Golf Club minute books. March 1935. The committee agreed to grant the use of the second fairway to Highland Airways for an air propaganda display. In August 1935, the profit for the club from that air show was a mere £3.17. In the same month, the committee approved a request from the Stornoway Trust that the club agree to the use of the second fairway as a landing area for aircraft. And in October 1935, the committee finally agreed to a request from the Stornoway Trust and the Town Council that the road crossing the second fairway should be levelled to further assist the landing of aircraft. Then in April 1936, the club received a Land Court order for resumption of 140 acres of ground at the Stanish end of the course for the purpose of constructing an aerodrome. September 1936, the club would still maintain the right to play golf on the 140 acres resumed for the purposes of an aerodrome. But in March 1939, there was discussion at committee about the likely effect of airport construction on the present course, and Mr. W. Brown of William Tawes described the position of the runways and submitted a map of the golf course with the runways superimposed thereon, showing the major effect on 8 of the 18 holes. I am indebted to the publishing company entitled After the Battle for allowing the use of this sketch tonight. It's a sketch of the Melbust golf course with the pre-World War II grass airfield of Captain Fresson and the World War II RAF airfield runways superimposed. In 1939, throughout the year, work continued on redesign, reconstruction of tees, greens, in order to enable golf to continue amidst the runways. In 1940, reconstructed parts of the course were declared open for play. Remember, at that time, the country was now at war. In May 1940, the ladies' locker room was taken over by the local defence volunteers. And then in August 1940, the ladies' locker room, the tea room, and all aircraft landing areas on the course were taken over by the RAF. In September 1940, a land officer from the Air Ministry informed the club that the Air Ministry were taking over the entire clubhouse, building and outhouses, with the exception of the tractor shed and workshop. And then in October 1940, the committee issued instructions that all golf equipment and members' belongings had to be removed from the building with immediate effect. Those of you who are or were involved in golf will know that the primary objective of a golf club, as defined in its constitution, is to provide facilities for the playing of the game of golf and to promote and encourage the game. Without a golf course, this was impossible, and with no facilities for golf, the club was legally obliged to suspend its constitution, to cease all activity and establish an emergency management committee. And this 1943 aerial photo shows the extent of the club's problems in wartime, with all the runways. And here is the same photo with my own notes attached. In October 1943, the committee agreed, on advice from the Stornoway Trust, to obtain a detailed valuation of the club's assets, on which would be based a claim for compensation against the Air Ministry. In September 1944, following the receipt of legal advice, the committee sought and received a revised valuation. And next, ladies and gentlemen, we come to one of the most important extraordinary general meetings in the history of the club, and I will read the relevant item from the minute. Now remember, at this point we have no clubhouse, and also remember at this point we have no captain, no operational golf club, just an emergency committee. The chairman introduced Mr. W.S. Kerr of W.S. Kerr and Company Solicitors, who gave a resume of the legal side of the question relative to the club's claim through the Trust against the Air Ministry, at present under consideration by the Scottish Land Court. Mr. Kerr went on to describe how the Land Court had met and, accompanied by members of the Stornoway Trust and the chairman and committee members, had agreed to view an area of ground within the Lewes Castle policies, which the Trust intended to allot for the purposes of reinstatement of a golf course. Discussion followed as to the suitability of the venue and of the proposed course, and alternative sites in Barvas and Vatterskere were considered. But the feeling of the meeting was that these alternatives were far too remote from the town to attract sufficient membership, and it was unanimously agreed to accept the site allotted, provided it was found suitable after examination by an expert golf architect. In this, the club was guided by Ed Aldred, factor of the Stornoway Trust, the Trust also being claimants against the Air Ministry. And the role played by this factor was crucial, as he guided the club in their negotiations with the authorities. Through his astute negotiations, and with some of his trustees, the Land Court finally came to an agreement in 1946 to award the sum of £9,600 to cover the cost of an 18-hole course and a clubhouse. An extraordinary general meeting was called to regularise the special committee which had presided over the club's affairs during its stressful period of uncertainty. And the special committee was re-elected en bloc, with additional members Malcolm Smith, W.S. Kerr, Malcolm Macaulay and William J. Campbell appointed, bringing the committee up to 14 and enabling the Constitution to be reformalised in preparation for the resumption of golfing activity. The Trust then empowered the club to enter into negotiations for the construction of an 18-hole course at a cost not to exceed £6,500, with a balance of the Air Ministry award going towards the construction of the clubhouse. Paisley was accepted and construction commenced in October 1946, with 9 holes ready for play on 14th July 1947. The objective of John R. Stutt's plan was to construct a full circuit of 18 holes, and that required the use of an area known as the Meadows, beyond the back road to Marybank Lodge. This area accommodated 4 holes, but ground conditions were poor, and these holes were abandoned later in 1948, as drainage in the location was not a viable proposition within the limits of the detailed finance. Now, what you see there is an original sketch of the golf course from the 1940s, with all the scribbles left exactly as they were. And I wish to focus on one or two interesting points from this sketch. Up here is the Meadows, and that's where the 4 extra holes were. You'll see an interesting arrowed line here, and that's going round the back of the present first green, the castle, and leading on to the manor, which is our present second hole. Now, when the 18-hole course was open, the manor was the first hole. There was no clubhouse down here, down the road. That's because the boys were using the castle. So they walked round the back of the 18th to the first. The castle, believe it or not, was the 18th hole at that time. And then when they finished their round here at the 18th, they were quite close to the clubhouse. What was the clubhouse? The gun room in the castle. The other interesting holes, which are lightly shaded, and this one here and this one here. That's the present heather, which goes all the way up to the corner. That is not the present memorial, because as you can see, the tee is way back beside the Gunsight Green. So the old memorial in 1947 was quite different from the present memorial. So that's an extremely interesting sketch. From 1948 to 1953, the club's locker room was in the Lewis Castle, and social activity in the club took place in Max Imperial on North Beach. Social activity. But before you rush to conclusions, the social activity, for the most part, was in the restaurant, which you can see on the left-hand side of the Max picture with the white sign above the door. And that was the venue for whist drives and other social events, including prize presentations. The 18-hole course, including the 4 holes on the meadows, was formally opened on the 12th of May 1948 by the Reverend R. Morrison, one of the club's oldest surviving members from the original Melbourne Club, and he drove the first ball. This was followed by an exhibition match in which visitors Kenny Cameron, the Nairn Club champion, and Ronald Gordon, captain of Nairn Golf Club, competed against Stornoway Club member Willie John Campbell and Stornoway greenkeeper professional Robert McIntosh, and the visitors, I believe, won by 5-3. And in the evening, a celebration dinner was held in the Royal Hotel with formal toasts to the club, to the Stornoway Trust, and to John R. Stutt, the course builders. As mentioned earlier, the 4 holes in the meadows were lost because of drainage problems in 1949, and the heather and the memorial greens and fairways were removed from the course circuit in order to form a course of 12 holes, which were both acceptable for player safety and acceptable to the Scottish Golf Union for handicapping purposes, with 6 holes played twice to make up the 18. And this situation prevailed until the early 70s, and we see here images of a damp scorecard in my father's name from 1971. And if you look at the distances and whatnot on the right-hand side, you can actually see which were the holes repeated. And they're actually written in ink on the back of the left-hand side of the card. No score is recorded, as my father packed up early, drenched to the skin. You can see the corners are cut off the card, and that was because at that time the club reused unrecorded scorecards by placing a sticker over the original competition and player details. In 1972, 2 new holes, the Ardchilliw and the Caberfay, were constructed, and the heather and the memorial were brought back into play, followed in 1977 by 2 further new holes, the Ditch and the Rannel. The work on all of the course reconstruction was once again done by John R. Stutt of Paisley. I wish to pay tribute to 2 past members who made outstanding contributions to the development of Stornoway Golf Course and Golf Club as we know it today. The chief amateur architect of the golf course as we know it today was Angus M. Grant, known as Billy, Greens convener and later honorary president, who spent endless hours with pencil and paper on and off the course, working out lines of play and sites of greens and tees. But I must not forget as well that Billy was an excellent golfer, and during a Wednesday medal in the 70s, he had a score for 3 consecutive holes, which is unlikely ever to be repeated. Gunsight 2, short hole in 1, Whins 2, a total of 5 for 3 holes. Despite the acquisition of grants and loans for course and clubhouse extensions, plus our own fundraising activities, the club's financial state remained precarious in the 60s and 70s. Then enter Charlie Hogarth, with his bright ideas about a tote double and a weekly lottery. Although much more expensive than the 1 penny levy per round which had been set up in the 1940s, Charlie's schemes were an absolute goldmine for the club. With a complex weekly distribution network of tickets into families, friends, shops, local industry, including Harris Tweed companies, the club's historic financial records verify the value of Charlie's ideas, and the government's job creation programme provided additional help to the club. To celebrate the opening of the 18-hole course, an exhibition match was held on the 12th of May 1978, to the day exactly 30 years after the first course was opened in Lady Lever Park. The participants were Ken Galloway, reigning club champion, Alistair Thompson, Inverness club professional, Jim Farmer, Duddingston club professional, and George Hampton, Stornoway club professional. George, who was the last resident club pro at Stornoway, had come here from London Links in Fife in 1968, succeeding Eddie Wilson, who had come here from Burnt Island in Fife in 1960. And the first pro attached to Stornoway was Robert McIntosh, who joined our original club at Melbourne in the 1920s and remained in post at Lady Lever Park until his passing in October 1956 at the age of 72. I am pleased to say that I own some of McIntosh's clubs, and this is a hand-forged rustless cleek, similar to a number 1 or 2 iron in modern day clubs. Our McIntosh Stornoway is etched on the steel. The shaft is of hickory and the grip is of wound leather. The club is in almost perfect condition. That's the club. I could easily devote considerable time to competition winners, but not tonight. However, I do think that this photo deserves some detailed description. In 1949, the Western Isles Open was resurrected in the Lady Lever Park and has been played every year since then. Back row, Willie John Campbell, David P. McGregor, Colin McCaskill, Bertie Stephen. Front row, Frank Taylor from Calder Braes Golf Club in Lanarkshire, Alex Thompson, a local architect who stayed in Newton, Eddie Gray, father of Violet, married to DL, who was on the door tonight, and David Grierson, an official in the local customs department. In the semi-finals, Taylor beat Thompson 4-3, Grierson beat Gray by 1 hole, and in the final, Grierson beat Taylor by 2 holes to win the McVitie and Price Trophy, which is shown on the right. Grierson completed a notable double, having won the Seaforth Trophy in the qualifying rounds, seen here on the left, after a playoff with councillor Malcolm Smith. And here, a bit of a torn bit out of the Stornoway Gazette, David Grierson receiving the McVitie and Price Trophy from Mr. John McRae, Honorary President. This is an interesting photograph of a mixed foursome in 1949. And I would just like to point out 3 people. This guy here is Chris Munro. He was a local vet who stayed in Gotill Road. And this one here is Michael Aird, father of our current member, Pat Aird. And just behind the lady's shoulder here is Thompson Bruce, father of a recently deceased past captain Sandy Bruce, and Thompson Bruce was in the photo poster advertising this lecture. 1962 prize giving. Some interesting people from Stornoway here. John Stephen, manager of Lipton's. George McCormack, Angus's father. George had a shop and hairdressers on Cromwell Street. Norman MacLeod, known as Make, he had the Electrosports shop next to the Rendezvous. Dan Reid, past captain, manager of the MNI, or worked in the MNI. Dan now lives in Kilmarnock, aged about 97. Ian Cumming, BL bank manager. Adam MacLeod, accountant with Bird Semple. And George Prince, then aged 15. In the front is Eileen McKeever, wife of Donny McKeever of McKeever and Darts, and Mrs. Violet Cumming. From the late 1960s into the 1980s, Alan Whiteford achieved legendary status as writer of the golf notes in the Stornoway Gazette. Apart from the weekly detailed reporting of competition results, Alan seldom missed a chance to have a dig at any golfer in his press column. His writings would, I believe, be a bestseller if converted into a book, and it is said that he single-handedly increased the paper's sales. Time does not permit me to provide a list of Alan's quotes, although there is one which does spring to mind. Alan wrote about Stuart MacDonald as follows. When playing the Miller hole last week, Stuart had the distinction of holding a 4-wood for an eagle 2. When asked to what he attributed his success, Stuart replied that he had had a recent lesson from a mainland professional who told him to slightly alter his grip of his wallet, we presume. So my next move is to demolition and construction. And during the 1990s, successive club committees debated the financial implications and logistics of building a new clubhouse. The financial implications were considerable, and after grant and loan schemes were investigated, it was agreed that the scheme would proceed. The major logistical problem was the need to continue to function as a golf club in circumstances where demolition of the old and construction of the new would take place in the same site. And by arrangement with the owner of the old vacant Mitchell's garage, now the site of the Spar shop, all our greenkeeping plant and equipment moved across Bay Head to Mitchell's garage, allowing our own greenkeeping facility to be converted to a temporary golf club for the duration of the building project. About 140 lockers were removed from the original locker room and installed in a section of the greenkeeper's shed. Care had to be taken in the tight space to ensure there was enough room for the locker doors to open while facing each other. A central island of lockers was built, the flat end of which was used as a notice board. Thirsty work. Here we see 4 members contemplating their next move. If you look closely, Peter MacArthur is actually holding a can of iron brew, and the case of beer in front of him is purely coincidental. And the next move was to remove some of the fixed seating from the old club lounge and rebuild it in the shed. Here we see Fred McLennan testing the comfort of the seats, observed by Liz Carmichael. This is what was left after removal of the bar from the old clubhouse. And then it was rebuilt in the shed. And here is Sylvia Ridden and Margaret Rankin serving Donny Mackenzie. Television was installed in a temporary lounge in the shed. Members still recall the very comfortable and convivial atmosphere in these temporary premises, especially during the Winter League of 1995-96. And here we see Peter Sinclair, John MacDonald, Davy McLennan, Kenny Murray and John Murray McLean sorting out the meaning of life on a Saturday afternoon. Demolition. This is the last known photo of the old club before demolition commenced. Note the test cut of turf on the putting green. All the turf was stripped off and reused. The roof is off and the shop is wrecked. And you can see the turf has been lifted from the putting green, flattened. Then the new clubhouse started to take shape. Main contractor Sinclair and MacLeod. The following images depict the progress of construction. At the front door, across the front, looking towards the car park. That's the big tree in front of the ladies' and gents' locker room doors. That's a look at the back of the building with the edge of the greenkeepers building, that is our temporary golf club, just shown on the right. We're almost there. And here is the finished article, photographed between completion of the construction and the official opening by Alex John Mackenzie, Honorary President, on Friday the 21st of March 1997. And this is a sample letter of invitation addressed to Mr. Norrie McGregor, who was the Honorary Vice President at the time. And the outer stairs and the upstairs front extension were added later. People and events. As I said in my introduction, it is impossible for me to cover everything in the club's history tonight. Consequently, this final section is made up of my chosen items from some available photographs, in no particular order. Some will ignite some memories, others will, I hope, raise a smile or two. This section will be covered with minimum commentary from me. Staff from Bristol Helicopters were very keen members, keen users of the club, and they undoubtedly had a positive effect on the gross profit of the club. And this is Cy Rogers, winchman with Bristol's, speaking at a burnt supper. You remember Jeff Todd and Alan Elphinstone, both from Bristol Helicopters, Winter League winners in 1989 and 90. The club's first official starter was Sid Saville, and here he is receiving the keys to his new starter's hut from Ian McRitchie. This is John Dingwall, who worked for the Department of Agriculture, someone to whom the club owes a great debt for his planning and ultimately his implementation of the deep drainage system, without which Stornoway Golf Course would have many more serious flooding incidents than it has now, resulting in critical loss of revenue. Alistair MacLeod, 40 years of service as a greenkeeper and head greenkeeper. Alistair took up employment with the club in 1982. This photo was taken on the Glen Fairway, soon after the cutting of the new drain across the Glen and Memorial Fairways. The machinery used was a digger owned by W.J. MacLeod, and this resulted in the drain getting the informal nickname Bucochsburn. Alistair was and still is a highly talented golfer, 5-time winner of the Western Isles Open and 6 times club champion. John Graham, long-serving starter, whose good humour, polite communication with everyone, and copperplate handwriting of scorecards will never be forgotten. And a few old ones. Bronco MacArthur and Ken MacDonald on a golf trip. Gus Matheson, Bronco MacArthur, Frank Strachan, John Pongo Monroe, an excellent golfer and a highly skilled footballer, lost from this life at too young an age, and Ken MacDonald at the end. A group on the bus to a mainland inter-club match. Jimmy Mackenzie, Peter Dickey, John McKinnon, Norrie McGregor, and at the very edge of the photo, Alan Whiteford. Gus Matheson, one of the founder members of the Sullivan Golf Club. To become a member, you had to balance on the top edge of the seats on the back deck of the ferry and hit a golf ball into the Minch. And if you achieved it, members qualified to wear a Sullivan Golf Club tie, and I have mine with me tonight. I was a member. This is a group of golfers leaving for a trip in the 1970s. Most of them very well known. Back row, Fred Barrett, manager, Trustees Savings Bank. Dougie MacDonald, Fred McLennan, captain 1981 and 82. Kenny Lemons McLennan and Harris Mackenzie. In the front, Richard Dyson, who worked for the Hydro Board. Colin McKeever, who was captain 1977 and 78. Alec John Mackenzie, who was treasurer for 9 years in the 60s, captain in 1975-76, and later honorary president of the club. Arthur McIntosh on the left and Gus Matheson on the right, and in the centre, Norrie Tomsh MacDonald, attempting a double impersonation of former snooker world champion Dennis Taylor and Paul Hogan, aka Crocodile Dundee, at the same time. Derek Matheson and Murray MacDonald on a golf trip. Now at the time I thought about offering a prize for the best caption. Derek would be saying, "Can I have the top bunk, please?" And Murray would say in reply, "There's no way I'm sleeping with you." This is Ken MacDonald with his private plane. And this shot was taken from the Heather Green with Norrie Tomsh and myself on the Dardanelles Green. The photographer was on contract to the Guardian newspaper. This was the most powerful camera lens I have ever seen. A zoom in on the original photograph clearly revealed animals in the field in tongue. And through the lens from the Heather, you could actually see the windows of buildings on the other side of Broad Bay in Point. It's no wonder the paparazzi caused some problems for celebrities. This photo by the same photographer on the Heather Green and the next one show some amazing light effects. It really was wonderful to see this cameraman at work, but unfortunately Alan Budley MacLeod was not permitted to personally use this photo to advertise Titleist equipment. This is George Prince and Ken Galloway before the final of the Western Isles Open in 1967. The V-neck Ken is wearing is of the Aberdeen University golf team, British University's champions in 1968 at Gillen and 1969 at Southport and Ainsdale in Lancashire. A couple of shots of the Winter League: Todd MacDonald, Chris Kelso, Eddie Mackenzie, Sandy Bruce. Kenny Spoonian McLean, Morky McRae, Roddy Martin, and Malcolm Ollie MacLeod, who at that time was definitely the computer whiz kid of the golf club. In 1997, Neil Hampton, who was the eldest son of George Hampton, professional first at Bunt Island in Fife, then Stornoway, and then Pitlochry, came over to Stornoway for the Western Isles Open, and being one of the top golfers in the north of Scotland, he was fully expected to win. However, our own Neil Sharkey, just a teenager at the time, had other ideas. In the Battle of the Neils, the very big-hitting Sharkey repeatedly outdrove Hampton, and his play around the greens was amazing. I had the pleasure of refereeing that match, which Sharkey won comfortably. I've never met a quieter and more laid-back golfer than Neil Sharkey, that is. Incident number 1, he was unable to defend that title in 1998 because he was disqualified for forgetting to pay his entry fee. And incident number 2, I was drawn with Neil in a medal competition, and we both played very well. When we returned to the locker room, he took my card out of his pocket and said, "Right, Ken, what did you have on the first hole?" Andy MacDonald in action. Andy was one of our best golfers around the end of the 20th and the start of the 21st century. Colin McCritchie in action, one of our best golfers in the 21st century, a multiple winner of many scratch events, and he has achieved +1 handicap status on more than one occasion. Furthermore, I believe there is more to come. Chris Kelso, captain during the club's centenary celebrations. Centenary dinner top table. Jim Galloway, Honorary President, Mrs. Shona Murray, Lady Captain, Norrie McGregor, Honorary Vice President, Mrs. Irene Matheson, Chris Kelso, Captain, Mrs. Maureen Kelso, Sandy Matheson, Mrs. Zena McGregor, and Chris Murray. Alec John Mackenzie and Dr. Vishu. A more enthusiastic golfer than Dr. Vishu would be hard to find. He often conducted medical consultations on his phone between golf shots on the course. On one occasion, when a member of the royal family, a keen golfer, flew into Stornoway for a round on the course, those who were present in the club said that they would try to find him a golf partner to show him round the course. Then in walked Dr. Vishu, and he was asked, but he said, "No, I can't play with him. I have a game arranged with Donny Plummer at 6:15. It's no wonder Vishu was never considered in the New Year's honours list. And this is Tommy Marshall of the Hebridean Guest House, a keen member of the club. Kenny Murray carrying a haggis at a burn supper. Here is the first Western Isles County Championship held in Stornoway in 2010. Colin McCritchie, scratch winner. In the centre, Ian Ross, who was the Scottish Golf Union North District President, who came to Stornoway specially for the event, and Richard Galloway, who was the handicap winner. Club golf coaching became well established in the club, and the last time the National Mod was in Stornoway, the secretary had a phone call from a choir from Islay seeking the use of the club for choir practice. As one of the choir was a golf pro, Ron Gowdy from Islay, the secretary arranged free coaching from juniors in return for the use of the club for choir practice. In 2014, the Ryder Cup paid a visit to the club. Stornoway golfers have always been generous in their donations to charity, and several events in the annual fixture list invite a donation to a nominated charity in addition to the competition entry fee. The biggest single donation to charity occurred in 2004, when, over 2 days, with help from numerous individuals from the worlds of sport and politics, an amazing total of £26,000 was raised for the local Bethesda hospice. This is the winning team on the day. This was achieved via dinners, auctions, competition golf, raffles, and we even had Michael Martin, former Speaker in the House of Commons, playing the bagpipes. It is clear that the removal of fixed seating in the main lounge of the club has played a great part in enabling the club to diversify its business offerings, taking in live music events, darts tournaments, weddings, school reunions, Christmas meals, and charity events for the wider local public. In closing this presentation, I wish to revisit the first slide and emphasise the first word in my title. Tonight I have presented a history of Stornoway Golf Club, the history of the club, covering many other events, images and competitive incidents would be a different ballgame altogether. And I hope you have enjoyed elements of the club's history extracted from the past 132 years, during 65 of which I have had the pleasure of being a member. And thank you for supporting Stornoway Historical Society.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was meticulous research and delivery by Ken, as always, well prepared. That was done in an hour. As you all know, it takes quite a while to play around with Ken. especially when you have to stand back in awe at some of the shots he produces. I would like to thank Ken for devoting a lot of time to getting all these pictures together and the narrative, and hopefully if you wish to come along at the end of November, I'm not sure of the venue yet, but it's our next, it might very well be here or possibly in Stornoway Library, because it's a joint.
Well, it's definitely going to be here.
It's definitely going to be here. Thanks very much, Angus. Okay, thank you very much and good night.